I want to introduce to you one of the most fascinating and long-serving pagan leaders that I know of. Donald H. Frew is an elder in the Enrud and Garnerian traditions of modern Wicca and High Priest of Coven Trismegiston in Berkeley, California, which is part of the Covenant of the Goddess, or COG, the world's largest religious organization of witches and a supporter of Cherry Hill Seminary. Don has served 10 terms on COG's national board as PIO, as first officer. While he was PIO, he served as a consultant on occult crimes for various law enforcement agencies. This led to collaboration with the Committee for Scientific Examination of Religion, the FBI, and the Justice Department to create a report for law enforcement on so-called satanic crime. And hopefully we'll get to hear a little of that later today. Frew is a national interfaith representative for the Covenant of the Goddess and has represented Wicca in interfaith work for over 35 years on the boards of the Berkeley Area Interfaith Council and the Interfaith Center at the Presidio, at all of the modern parliaments of the world's religions.
But one.
Except one. And as vice president, as a member of the Parliament's Assembly of the world's religious and spiritual leaders, and then as vice president of and frequent contributor to the online interfaith journal, The Interfaith Observer. He was the creator of the 2004 International Interfaith Sacred Space Design Competition, incorporating 160 designs from 17 countries, and editor of the resulting book, Sacred Spaces. Don founded and serves as director for the Lost and Endangered Religions Project, and I understand we have a guest today, Dr. Little, I believe, is also connected with that project. Welcome. This project has helped marginalized religious communities to preserve their religious traditions. He's the founder and serves as president of Adocenton Research Library, a pagan library in the San Francisco Bay Area. Don has served as a North American trustee on the United Religion Initiative's first elected Global Council, as an at-large trustee on the second and third Global Councils, as a continuing trustee on the fourth Global Council, and served again at large on the current Global Council until stepping down in September 2020. He and URI founder Bishop William Swing are the only trustees to have served on all the URI's elected global councils. His research on the origins of modern Wicca and his interfaith work keep him traveling and encountering the world's cultures and people, having visited 25 countries to date, including 7 trips to Egypt. I'm so jealous. In Egypt, he has started a micro crowdfunded Egyptology project to gather small amounts of money in the US to fund small but necessary archaeological projects in Egypt. So help me give a warm welcome to Don Frew. And Don, where did you go? There you are. Okay, good. You're unmuted. And please introduce yourself. Beyond the formalities, you've been a pagan.
What am I supposed to say beyond that? I mean, you've
been a pagan for a long time. Tell us how you came to this path.
Well, I grew up on the peninsula south of San Francisco, and my parents were very open-minded. My mother was a lapsed Christian Scientist her mother had broken her leg and gone to a doctor and never felt like she could go back to the church, strangely enough. So they no longer practiced. And my father's family I've looked back for ages and I can't find any religious affiliation in his family. If he had one, it was capitalism. And so they didn't raise my brother and I with any religion. If we were interested in anything, they would make it available to us. I attended Sunday school at a local church once. That was more than enough for me. And so I explored on my own. And as a child, one of the things I really do remember is that the first book I ever read on my own was a children's book of Egyptian myths. And I couldn't understand what the difference was between myths and Bible stories. These seemed like basically the same thing. Why wasn't one being treated as seriously as the other? And so I had an interest. And then in 6th grade, I and a number of other kids formed a we called it a coven out of published books, notably Hans Holzer's books, which really are not great to be working from. And I was told that one of the kids was being taught by someone nearby, a witch named Lilith St. John, which always sounded like a very fakey name to me. And I never met this person and assumed they didn't exist. And it wasn't until probably 2005 that I found a book on witchcraft from that period that had a chapter interviewing witches, and interviewed Lilith St. John in Millbrae, California, which was the town to the north of us. So I have to say, well, I guess she was real. But then I just maintained an interest in psychic phenomena and magic until I got to Berkeley. And I shifted majors from physical anthropology to religious studies partway through, and arranged a Halloween party for the religious studies majors. And that meant contacting local witches and druids, and the witches invited me to a Sabbath that was being held at the beach, at which someone who's in our audience right now, Rowan Fairgrove, was one of the leading participants. So she's one of the reasons I got back involved. And after that re-exposure, I had a very powerful mystical experience that confirmed to me, well, this is really the path for you. And from then on, I've been practicing Wicca. So, and that was in 1980. Actually, that would be about 1980. So the only religion I've ever had is Wicca, which is unusual for someone of my generation, and been practicing it ever since. So that's a very condensed version.
So how have you been received by people with the United Religions Initiative and the Parliament and your various interfaith contacts?
Well, it's a funny thing. In Berkeley, the Berkeley Area Interfaith Council, Glenn Turner, who is a member of the Covenant of the Goddess and created the Pantheacon Festival, she, on one of the first things, like the first year that Covenant of the Goddess was formed, she lived in Berkeley and she attended the Berkeley Area Interfaith Council and apparently did a bunch of fundraising work for them. And so when I was first elected public information officer for COG, and the first time, and that was in, oh boy, when was that? 1985. And I said, well, one of the things I should be doing is interfaith. So I went to the Berkeley Area Interfaith Council and I walked in the door, and on one side of the room were Unification Church people and people from the Hare Krishnas and sort of those folks, Scientology. And on the other side of the room were all these people from the mainstream churches, and they were mostly retired people, mostly women. And I thought, well, I wonder how this is going to go. And so I filled out my little name tag with Covenant of the Goddess and went to get some coffee. And someone looked up and said, Covenant of the Goddess. Oh, Glenn's group. How's she doing? We haven't seen her in years. And immediately sort of, shuffled me over to the mainstream side.
Wow.
And so from then on, I was on their board a year later. And Berkeley was very, very accepting. And from Berkeley, it was easy to sort of take steps, from there to regional interfaith, from there to national interfaith. And I found that in most places, I didn't have to push too hard. People were either accepting or, and this was true all through, and it was something I emphasized in my public information officer work, I would find someone that we knew in common. Someone who I knew who would vouch for me well, that that person would believe, and say, well, you don't know me from Adam, go talk to so-and-so. And these people would say good things. And that made it very, very easy. So unlike a lot of people in a lot of parts of the country that have really had to force their way into interfaith councils, my path was really a pretty simple one.
That's a good strategy for our students to remember. We tell people to build allies in your community.
Well, and especially also one of the things I did as public information officer was to reach out to evangelical Christians. People, several different groups who've traditionally been sort of our enemies, if you want to put it that way. And I attended a local conference on deception and discernment that was run by a group called the Spiritual Counterfeits Project. And I attended, and the person from the Spiritual Counterfeits Project, Brooks Alexander, was very reasonable. And he disagreed with us, and he presented why from a biblical perspective we were wrong, but he didn't misrepresent us. Unlike a lot of the other speakers who were just saying insane things. And one of them said that, witches worship unicorns, and we'd created the Dungeons and Dragons manual as an introduction to witchcraft because it taught people how to do real magic. And so during the question and answer period, I stood up, and people had sort of assumed that COG was Church of God, I think, up to them. And I said, well, a lot of what you're saying is just not true. And I sort of pointed these things out, and the speaker said, well, how would you know? And I said, well, I serve on the board of the largest witchcraft organization in the world. And people near me on the bench, on the pews, sort of started moving away. And during the next break, several people made sort of half-hearted attempts to convert me. But the speaker from the Spiritual Counterfeits Project came over and said, hi, I'm Brooks Alexander. And I said, hi, let's get coffee. And so that started a conversation that led to several 4-hour dialogues between Covenant of the Goddess and the Spiritual Counterfeits Project that were fantastic on topics like, the meaning, what is the nature of evil, and the use of ritual, and just a whole bunch of fantastic things. And after that, around the country, when I would get contacts from people who were having trouble with an evangelical minister, I'd say, well, they're never going to believe you, but have them contact the Spiritual Counterfeits Project, because they'll believe them. And the Spiritual Counterfeits Project will tell them, yes, they're damned. Yes, they're going to hell, but no, they don't eat babies, and they make perfectly fine neighbors. And I thought, that's a win, so, even getting those kinds of vouchers could still be helpful. So that was kind of an approach that I took all along, was we don't have the resources to educate the public, but we have the resources to educate the people who educate the public.
Yeah.
And that was always my approach.
That's good. Well, a lot of us are just coming off of several days in the virtual Parliament of the World's Religions this past weekend. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts about how interfaith has changed in the last 35 years.
Well, in 1993 is when 1893 is when the first Parliament happened in Chicago. And then not a lot until 1993 was rolling around. And so, excuse me, the year before, I went to the Grand Council of Counterfeits of the Goddess, and I said, this thing's coming up. I think we should be sponsors, and we need to send people. And so COG agreed and sent officially 3 people, the first officer, Phyllis Carrot, and the 2 public information officers, me and Michael Thorne. And then 40 other COG people came at their own expense.
Wow.
And I see Rowan here. I'm not sure who else was here at the 93 Parliament. And so we were able to have much more of a presence. And from the very first session, when Gerald Barney said that, had all these slides and said, here's how much land we're using, here's how much we're converting to food, and how much food production, and how much it takes to feed people, and how quickly we're growing. And so he sort of ran all these graphs and said, like in 2023, the planet begins to die, unless we find new religions and new ways to resacralize the earth and change our relationship to it. And there we were. And so we thought we would be sort of a side note. And instead, attention was completely turned to focus on the Native Americans and on us. And the indigenous people tended to be very closed. They weren't open. Whereas we had a hospitality suite. We had someone going to the press room every day. We did a ritual in the park for the full moon that we planned for 50 and got 500.
I've heard about that one.
So several people said, in 1893, the world learned about Hinduism and Buddhism. In 1993, they learned about the pagans.
Yeah.
And one press person said 1993 was the coming out party for the neo-pagans. And so anyone who was there can easily spend the rest of the day telling you stories. But the main thing is that after 1993, interfaith changed drastically because it was so open. There were like 5,000 people in the one hotel where things were happening, and another 3,000 that were attending outdoors events. So instead of being the leaders sitting around a table, which they did, they had the Assembly of the World's Religious Leaders, but instead it was everybody who believes in this was welcome. And so interfaith changed from official delegates to everyone who feels like called to do this.
Yeah.
And it also changed in that it became open to everybody. And so interfaith groups started asking themselves, who's not here? Who's not at this meeting? We need to reach out to them rather than waiting for them to come now knock on the door. And those two things were just massive changes in interfaith. And after that, it made it much easier for witches who were kind of leading the way, and other pagans to get involved. So everything from 1993 forwards is just a completely different world than before that.
I've known about the Parliament since 1993 because I was finishing up school late. And one of my professors was one of the key organizers, apparently. Two of them from our religious studies department actually hosted the planning retreat for the Chicago Parliament. So there's always been sort of a link right here with Columbia and the University of South Carolina. So you mentioned...
Let me say, I want to stress to people who've only attended the virtual parliaments, the magic of the Parliament, and I really want to stress magic, is that the 1993 one was, like I said, 8,000 people over 10 days. And a lot of them have been shrinking in size. They just didn't have the money to pull it off. But when you have that many people gathered together for a period of time, and it's like, oh, you were at that talk, that was a fun talk, why don't we go get dinner and talk about it? You make a community over a period of time. And in making that community, you create in microcosm an image of what you want the outcome to be, which is something that we who practice magic can kind of go, hey, I know what that is. It's a spell.
Yeah.
And so I really believe that when we come together, especially in person, to create these small communities, we're saying basically, come see what the world can be. And I think that we're working a great spell for world change. So
that's beautiful.
When we actually can come together in person again, and hopefully that will be 2023 in Chicago, I really encourage people to go. If you can make it to a face-to-face parliament, go. Be part of it. It
is amazing. I mean, the spectacle alone, just walking the halls and watching people is amazing.
In 1993, they had a parade of religious sort of representatives. Mostly it was, I don't know how they picked the people really, but the local cardinal was in red, and I was in red robes too. And so they put us together to walk, down in this sort of parade of people coming into the Parliament. So just because we visually matched,
That's great. That's great. I have a red robe story, but I'll save it for another time. Well, you've mentioned COG several times, Covenant of the Goddess, and you were instrumental in their starting, weren't you?
No, not at all.
No, okay.
Covenant of the Goddess formed in 1975, and I came in really in 83 when I joined a Firestar that was a member of COG. And then in 85, I was elected PIO, Public Information Officer. And that sort of started a long sequence of terms on the board, mostly doing public information work. A couple as first officer with someone else, with Diana Paxson or with Catherine Starr. But then they we realized in COG, one of the other people doing interfaith, Deborah Ann Light, came to people and said, we elect new officers every year, and interfaith doesn't work that way anymore. They're not going to say who's the official representative from the Covenant of the Goddess. They're going to say, who do we know? And so this has to be an appointed position, even though that goes against everything we think of. We think, we're ground up grassroots democracy or consensus really in Covenant of the Goddess. And he said, but that's what we have to do. And so National Interfaith Representative was created as an appointed position that still requires reappointment every year, so it's possible to kick us out. But Deborah Ann Light and I were the first National Interfaith representatives, and now there's several, of whom Andrea Kendall, who's here, and Rowan Fairgrove, who's here, are also National Interfaith representatives. And that way we can build those relationships and keep them going.
Yeah, yeah. What about Enrud, the New Reformed Order of the Golden Dawn? Do you want to tell us anything about that?
Well, people usually pronounce it Nerud.
Nerud, thank you.
I know, which is funny. I was also not there for the creation of that, but I always find it interesting that the two traditions that I'm very active in there. The Gardnerian tradition, which sort of prides itself on having a lineage, you know, I was taught by this person, it was taught by this person, going back to Gardner and beyond, those of us who are involved think is true. And then the Neruda tradition was created in San Francisco as an anthropology class project, where there was an assignment to create a ritual, and the people involved decided to make something. Let's try to make a witches' Sabbath, and put something together and did a ritual for the class, and then said, you know, why don't we like try to do that sort of in a like a for real kind of setting? And they gathered, I think it was on Angel Island, and for a full moon, and did the same ritual sort of out under the stars and in the woods. And one of the people who was there, Aidan Kelly, who was the kind of person who tended to record things, so he wrote all this down. He said that a woman who was there named Gypsy said after the ritual was done, you know, when Marx said that religion was the opiate of the people, I don't think he expected the people to respond, far out, let's get stoned. You know, and so Neruda was very much a creative effort, and its real beauty is in the creation of unique poetic language for the Sabbats, and that are constantly being recreated. So it's very, you know, like at the other end of the spectrum almost from Gardnerian, and yet I love practicing both together, not really together, but both at the same time.
Yeah. It's funny, your story, which, by the way, if anybody has not read Drawing Down the Moon by the late and beloved Margot Adler, she talks about this, but it also reminds me of the Carleton College in Minnesota and the Druid group that formed out of students who actually, in that case, I think wanted to get out of chapel, mandatory chapel, and started having services of their own out in nature, and decided that, oh, this really works for us.
Yeah.
Well, so we do religious studies at Cherry Hill, and I have been curious for a long time to hear you talk more about LERP, or the Lost and Endangered Religions Project. So would you share with our folks just what that is and tell us a little bit about what you've accomplished there?
Well, I'm really glad that Lane is here, so I can hand this over to him for part of it. Because basically, one of the things that I'm really focused on is the origins of the modern witchcraft movement. And I really believe that there's a history going back to classical antiquity, but that's a whole long talk into itself. But that research took me to some place called Haran, which is in eastern Turkey. And it was the city to which the last teachers of the academy fled when paganism was outlawed in the Roman Empire. And it's a place from which classical teachings then made it back into Europe. And so I had all this material saying, and then they went to the East. And then I'd have all these other things saying, they came from the East. I'm going, what the hell was going on in the East? And there wasn't that much available. So I said, well, I'll go there. And so I went to this city, this ruin, which has yet to be really excavated. And there's a whole fascinating story to Haran. But while I was there, my guide said, would you be interested in visiting a Yazidi village? And I'd heard of Yazidis. They were sort of semi-mythical, and usually Yazidi devil worshiper was one sort of breath. And I said, sure, let's go. And so my guide knew these people. And so my wife, Anna, and I went, and we had dinner with the village headman and the other men. Unfortunately, me and the men in one room, and Anna with the women and children in another room. And I was desperately worried that she was being left out of the conversation, but it turned out she was having a fantastic time with the women and kids. So, but I was talking with them, and they talked about how they were persecuted by the Muslim community and how they were constantly having to uproot and move. And I asked, we were comparing like Wicca and Yazidi practice, which was fascinating. I said, do you have sacred texts? And they said, well, yes, we did. But 4 generations ago, they were lost, because in one of these things where we had to like move at gunpoint, quickly, but they were lost and we don't have them anymore. And I thought to myself, and I said, well, I have a copy, because in 1900, a religious scholar from the West had collected a lot of these teachings and published them in 1901. And I had a copy at home. And so I thought, well, I can send these to you. So when I got home, I just made a copy, like Xerox the whole thing, and sent it to them in the mail. And they sent me just this effusive gratitude back in the mail. Um, and I just thought to myself, boy, that was easy. How often have teachings or information been lost in a culture, but it's been recorded by someone, probably an academic? Like, no one remembers the birthing song anymore, but somebody recorded it somewhere. You know? And since we're not talking about material culture, like pots or fabrics or things, we're just talking about copying information, from one place to another. This is easy. It's a win-win for everyone. So what then happened is I was at the Parliament in Cape Town, and I was in the Assembly, the religious leaders, so-called. They dropped the religious leaders part as too many people were saying, how come so-and-so's there and I'm not? So then they just started calling it the Parliament Assembly. And in the Assembly at Cape Town, they had this brilliant idea to sort of in a table talk about this thing called the global ethic, which had been developed in 1993, sort of what do you think is the most important part of it? And then when we went to lunch, we came back and you were now sitting at a different table with people who agreed that that was the most important part. And then you were talking about civil society and what was the most important area of civil society that needed to engage that part. And you agree and write stuff, and then you go away on a break and come back, and now you're at a new table with people who agreed on that. And so they just accelerated this R&D process to develop what they called gifts of service, where people of different religions could work together. And this idea was in my head because it had just happened. And I thought, how about creating something where we can work with endangered religious communities to either restore lost information or help them to retain information that's in danger of being lost. And so that became the Lost and Endangered Religions Project, which if I'd thought at the time, the acronym LERP kind of sounds not that great. I probably would have tried to think of something else, but it wasn't until somebody else called it that I thought of it. So I came back to the United States. I talked about this to the Interfaith Center at the Presidio. They said, we'd love to make that a project of ours, so it's under our financial wing. We did that. And the director, Paul Chafee, was talking to people in Lincoln, Nebraska, the Interfaith Center there. And the guy who runs that center said, we have a Yazidi community here. I wonder if they have these texts. And they mentioned it, and they said, you have a copy of the Black Book? How can we get this? And so someone from Nebraska came out, and we had a whole thing where I gave them a copy of this text, and they were all thrilled. And so we thought, that we got something here. So it expanded into other projects. One where we were still working on trying to put together a conference about Haran, because the city is endangered and it's a treasure trove of cultural information. Working to make nodes around the world that have copies of both oral recordings and texts of the predominantly Gardnerian, but craft traditions, so that they're in multiple places. So if one place like had a fire or a theft or something, they're copied in multiple places. Was working with people, a group called the Nashi in southwestern China, who have probably the most purely pictographic language on earth, where a Nashi text, like say if you were telling the story of the Garden of Eden, a Nashi text would probably just be something like darkness, and then an ocean, and then like some light, and then a garden, and then some animals. That's it. And if you don't know the story, you can't retrieve it from it. So we said, and the people who know the stories that go with these texts are dying. The government's preserving the texts as cultural artifacts, but if you don't know the stories, they don't mean anything. So I started working with a professor there, and we were going to have this idea of getting audio cassettes in and sort of recording things and swapping them back out. And the government's just put up all sorts of roadblocks. They don't like the idea of cassettes going in and out of the country.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to work around that. And then there's a few others in other parts of the world, but the main thing was when I connected with Lane over other things like role-playing games. But Lane is a professor of South Asian studies, and immediately projects suggested themselves in South India. And we've had just amazing successes in South India. So if Lane could give just a little bit of an explanation, I think that would be great. So
I'm unmuting him or asking.
I think I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Elaine.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. I'm, of course, Don is one of my dearest friends, and we share so much of similar interests and passion for all things wondrous and magical and mystical. One project that I got involved with in terms of LERP that I thought was a perfect thing for LERP, and which I also agree is a very unfortunate name, I think. But who knows? Maybe we can work on that. Was that my wife does a lot of research on Sri Vaishnava traditions, specifically temple institutions and literature associated with the worship of Vishnu in South India. Much of this is either in the Tamil language, which is a Dravidian language, or in a hybrid language called Manipravala, which literally means rubies and pearls, and it refers to a hybrid language, which is a mixture of Tamil and Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is an Indo-Aryan language. It doesn't have any relationship to Dravidian languages, but as part of the priestly traditions, of course, a lot of the ritual hymns, actually the invocationary elements utilized in ritual are in Sanskrit, but a lot of the devotional liturgy is in the Tamil language. And these temples are some of the most beautiful structures in the world. And they have developed, pretty much over a period of about 1,600 years. A lot of these temples date back to, these more monolithic temples date back to between the 8th and the 12th century, or the kind of pinnacle period of temple production. They have a huge priestly tradition that maintains them, and very specific roles of priests that have evolved over time. One of the most important ones is a group of priests known as the Arayad. Aray in Tamil means those who recite, and they have a special role in festivals where they take on the guise of an ancient mystic saint named Periyalvar, which just means Alvar is the name of the canonized saints. It means those who are immersed, or those who are in the ocean of ecstasy. And a lot of this tradition was developed based on mystic poets who would go into ecstasies and spontaneously sing songs to Vishnu. And these were recorded, and these became the Sri Vaishnava canon of hymns. And it is said in South India that these temples were literally sung into existence because of the powerful poetical skills and mystical passion of these poets. So even contemporary priests are still assuming the roles of one of these poets in particular for a particular kind of ritual liturgy that used to be performed all over in South India. But as time went on, these were traditions that were passed on in patrilineal succession. And as modernity approached, priests, their kids wanted to go and study computer engineering and not have the humble role of being a priest in a temple. So over time, and more specifically in the last couple of centuries, these have dwindled. A role now is only assumed in 3 temples in all of South India. There's the greatest Vishnu temple in South India, Sri Rangam. So there's plenty of Arayas there. There's another temple, a smaller kind of remote village temple called Sri Vilibatur, where there's one father and one son, but it's not sure if the son is really going to step up and keep things going. And then there's another little town, which is a very important site because it's the very first of these ancient singer saints, and that's a place called Alvar Tirunagari. And there's 2 brothers that are running it. One, the elder brother, who knows the ritual liturgy pretty well, never had a son, and his wife passed away, and he has a daughter. He has a younger brother who does have a son, but we don't know if that will pass on. So, my wife Archana Venkateshan was doing research at this site, and I was there traveling with her. We found that they did have a liturgical manuscript, what is called a palm leaf manuscript with the liturgy. These are very rare. So he's got this manuscript, but they don't even know how to read it because a lot of it is in a script that known as Grunta. It's a very ancient script, and it's one that you can write both Tamil in and get the Sanskrit sounds in, but it's not a commonly known script. So he can't even read the script. And they don't even want to handle it because the script is 500 years old, hand copied. This is what these are called an olai. This is what it looks like. So you can see here, it's some of the Tamil writing. Sometimes there's some magical diagrams as well. This one, it does have a little bit of magical diagrams.
That's just an example of one. That's not the one we worked with.
Yeah, this is not the one. This does have a magic square though, that you might be familiar with. And so these are like etched with a stylus. They cut palm leaves, and then they have a stylus that is used to etch the letters in. And then they usually mix ash from an oil lamp, and they'll rub the ash into the carved elements where the letters are so that you can actually read the text. And but the problem is there's a lot of, they're prone to being eaten by insects. They take a lot of steps to sometimes wrap them in red and yellow cloths because insects don't like those colors. But they still get damaged, and they really needed to, most in the preservation of these texts, there's a specific kind of plant oil that is very useful in preserving these manuscripts and repelling insect attacks. So we wanted to help this community of Arayas and make sure that their text, first of all, was preserved, because they're afraid to handle the manuscript because it was in a dangerous state. We were working with the French Institute in Pondicherry, which has one of the largest collections of rare ancient palm leaf manuscripts in all of India. And both of us had had a relationship with them for over 20 years. So we agreed that we would fund, through LERP, we'd fund the preservation of this manuscript, but we would also go through and would take we'd actually make a printable document and also a digital document that would transcribe all of the Grunta script into Tamil script, with also giving proper notations with Devanagari script. That's the script that you usually see Sanskrit in, so that the Ariyas would have a better chance at passing on this liturgical tradition to anyone that's willing to keep the tradition alive, in hopes that this tradition would not die out. And it's
they could actually read their sacred script text for the first time in
that is right.
Years, generations.
That is right. So the liturgy was memorized, at least for the Arya, the older brother Arya had the liturgy pretty much memorized, but he was kind of forgetting too, because it's very complex. He takes on the crown of this saint and kind of begins to sing this liturgical text. And there's a gestural language of mudras, symbolic hand gestures, that also accompany it. So it's quite intricate, and you need to work with the text to be able to master this and get this all down. And especially because actually in these three temples, there's quite a bit of variation, even though it used to be a common practice. So over the years, there's been changes of the liturgy. So this was an attempt to be able to kind of fix and restore a liturgical, magical ritual tradition that has undergone incredible change over time and is seriously facing dying out at least two of the last three institutions where this kind of ritual is performed. And this is a ritual that dates back 800 years to the 12th century. And for the Vaishnava community, this is a very special sacred thing. And some Vaishnavas go on pilgrimage just to be able to see this ritual performed, because it's what was once performed in many, many sites is today only performed at 3.
That is amazing. Thank you so much.
And I think at this temple, there were 4 different traditions that were being all four in danger of being lost. And this one, was critical, but in the process, the three others were also being addressed as well. Four distinct traditions operating in the same temple.
That's true. There's a tradition. Hindu temples used to have what are known as Devadasis.
That's the one that I wanted to mention that too. Yeah.
Yeah. These were essentially in ancient Hindu temples in many parts of India, specifically in the southeastern portion up into the north of India. Medieval temples would have women who usually were dedicated to young girls. They were known as Devadasis. They would be ritually married to the deity. They were essentially the most educated and sophisticated women in medieval Hindu society. Many of them spoke many languages, but especially they were trained in song and dance. So a lot of the classical traditions of Indian dance that we see, like Bharatanatyam or Odishi style dance, these were originally the keepings of these women who were married to the deity. And there was actually, during the colonial period, when the British were taking the census, they didn't know how to list these women that danced and performed at temples. All they could think of is like old biblical references to Babylonian temple prostitutes or something. So they actually listed these unmarried women, but they did have families, but but
they're also married to the god.
But they're married to the god. They had more freedom, definitely, in every aspect in society than other women. But the British listed them as prostitutes, even though they were the most sophisticated and refined women in all of Hindu society at that time. And the caretakers of all the great, like Hindustani and Carnatic classical music that you hear, most of it are in these, and they were matrilineal, matrifocal households. Women ruled the house. Women owned property, which didn't exist in the rest of Hindu society. And they were keepers of this knowledge.
But now they become ostracized and stigmatized as prostitutes.
Well, and they started being banned in temples in the 1880s. And then by the late 1840s, there was the Devadasi Prohibition Act, where they were outlawed altogether. The government tried to give them jobs weaving baskets or cutting matchsticks.
And so imagine surviving Devadasis, they're selling their jewelry in order to buy food.
That's right. And they've lost most of their land. They've had to sell off their land and live in poverty. Many of them turned to prostitution because that's all they had left. And not only that, but the Brahmin elites have essentially stole their performative traditions, so that middle upper class Brahmins now take over these traditions but they have changed.
But there are some still surviving. We have to move it along. I'm sorry, Lane.
Yeah, sorry.
But there are some still surviving who were taught the traditions and are now often old women. And so we're trying to help the tradition survive by recording the dance traditions from them. And in the process, discovering that when people come in and say, hey, what you have is really valuable, I want to record it. Now other people are looking at them and going, oh, maybe this is something I should be paying attention to. And we have some wonderful footage of a little girl imitating, I think it's her grandmother, that was dancing for our recording. And she started imitating her grandmother's dance and wanting to learn it. So hopefully we can keep the tradition alive. So did that cover that okay, Lane? Okay, good. So that's some of, I think, the most important work that Lost and Endangered Religions Project has been doing is in South India. So anyway, that's us. That's what we do. Well, I think as Holly's frozen.
Have we lost Holly?
I think so. Yeah. Do you have a list of her questions? Do you want to pick it up?
Well, so I was just going to say, I'll jump in while she's hopefully can dial back in. Well, so we had a question, Don, from Cynthia about and you kind of hinted at this with the little girl, these spiritual practices that you and Lane have been talking about, are there, I guess if they're disappearing, there aren't as many young people involved, but what's your take on the interest from the younger generations in these practices?
I think there's a recurring pattern that often younger generations, as Lane said, they want to become, computer engineers. But often when people see that people are paying attention to the traditions and valuing them, then there's a greater interest to want to get back and get involved. And one of the key aspects of this is a lot of cultures have basically had their culture stolen, by academics that have come in and said, what a wonderful pot, we'll take that. Or even what a wonderful ancestor, we'll take this body, and put it in our museum. And so a big part of what we're involved in is trying to restore good faith, and make it clear that the Lost and Endangered Religions Project is in service to the religious community in question. When we take the palm leaf manuscript and restore it and give that back to them and make a digital copy and get it transcribed, we're not publishing that. That's for them. If they decide they'd like it published, fine. But all of this is being, we give it back to them. We ask if they'd like us to hold a copy for them, to help make sure it's preserved. Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes no. But it's entirely at the discretion of the religious community. So we're trying not to impose our own values into it as to what we think they should do. And so, we want to make clear that it's all in service. And that's sometimes a new thing, to see academics in service.
Well, and I'm curious, are you aware of or involved with any work that looks at maybe some traditions that we might see more as modern neo-pagan? Are there any efforts there to recover traditions or writings or other things that may have been lost?
Just the work we've been doing with archiving material, that's all, in terms of what you call neo-pagan. Yeah. That's all. Nothing more elaborate than that. Although in a lot of cases that there is a certain amount of preservation there, because we're preserving material from organizations that no longer exist sometimes, or organizations that are down to just a few people. So, maybe there'll be interest again. And when there is interest, the material will be there. And sometimes people will say, like I was working really with a couple of tribes in the Northeast, where it would be like in one community, I'm going to use shaman for want of a better word, the spiritual elder did not have someone to pass the traditions on to, but it turned out that in another community of the same tribe, there was a young person who was interested. And so we could facilitate that communication and help provide what was needed to make it work. So when there's a new person, a next generation that's interested, we can help make the connection with the people to make sure that the tradition survives. That's why we're saying both lost and endangered. Sometimes the material's been lost entirely, and sometimes it's on the verge of being lost, like with the Devadasis tradition. And it's also, although those of us doing it are primarily earth religion people, it's for anybody. If there's a marginalized Christian community in Russia somewhere, we want to help them too.
Don, I want to ask
back.
you about.
There's Holly.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Thank you, Lane.
First of all, I want to tell people, if please do keep yourself muted, and if you have a question, please put it in the chat box, and we'll bring those up as we have time. Don, I want to shift gear a little bit, because I think we probably have a lot of people present who either don't remember or don't really know the history of the Satanic Panic, and unfortunately, some of that stuff seems to be coming back again. In the form of conspiracy theories these days. So would you like to share a little bit about your role back in the day?
It's rearing its ugly head in the mental health professions as well, which is very frustrating. Many of us of my generation or older remember a time when, like, Bewitched was the most popular show on television. And if you asked people about witches, they'd mention Glinda the Good Witch and the Wicked Witch of the West. It's like, people didn't automatically have a negative association with witchcraft. And then it seemed like all the work that had been done was just sort of, let's throw that back several steps with the Satanic Hysteria. And the Satanic Hysteria largely starts in 1980 with the book Michelle Remembers, which was by a woman named Michelle Smith and her therapist, Lawrence Pazder. And Michelle, under regression therapy, was remembering as an adult, but only through therapy, only through hypnosis was she remembering. This is the beginning of recovered memory, which became its own thing. Was she remembering that as a child she'd been taken from one satanic group to another and used in various rituals and ceremonies, and there was this massive cult spread across the world, really, that was passing children back and forth to do these horrible things to them. And Michelle was remembering all this and ended up marrying her therapist, Lawrence Pazder, which is kind of a strange thing. But this book really struck a chord. I think it was as we were approaching the end of the millennium, and several people were sort of just primed to find evil people out there. I think that SCP conference on deception and discernment was also really primed that, wanting people to be warriors for God against the evil Satanists. But Michelle Remembers really started the hysteria. And shortly after, I'd say, I became a police consultant on ritual crime and the occult. And I worked on the Matamoros murders case and the McMartin preschool case, and several others. And as a result, I went to a friend who was involved with the PsyCop, the group that investigated paranormal claims, and through him to the Committee for Scientific Examination of Religion, because what was going on here is basically people were being sold a bill of goods that was getting backed up by law enforcement people, and the law enforcement people were being sold a bill of goods at seminars where basically evangelical Christians were providing all of the information about Satanism and what the occult is and what witches do. And it was all completely bogus. So the hook that I was able to pull them in with was, your tax dollars are being used to spend on this completely religious information that's being given to the police and then being acted on. And so as a bunch of skeptics, that was basically the thing that got them interested. But as a result, that then led to an actual investigation with scientists from the Committee for Scientific Examination of Religion, and Ken Lanning from the FBI, and Robert Hicks from the Justice Department. And I was the occultist on the team. And we had a 3-year investigation of satanic crime, in which we basically found that there basically wasn't satanic crime, that what little there was out there that you could call satanic crime was being perpetrated by typically young men in their late teens, early 20s, who were acting alone or had sort of coerced some buddies to help them. They were getting almost all of their information about what Satanism was from the lyrics or information in heavy metal music albums, or from Christian anti-Satanism books. That was one of the main sources for people's information on Satanism around the country. And based on that, they were then committing satanic sacrifices that were things like hitting a convenience store clerk over the head with a hammer. Somehow this was a sacrifice to Satan. But this was the only thing we could find. There was no organized satanic crime. None of the known satanic groups, like the Church of Satan or the Temple of Set, were engaged in any kind of criminal activity. There were no conspiracies out there. And so a lot of, and believe me, this is one of those things like the Parliament in '93 that if you let me go, I'll go for quite a while. Because a lot of people, well, first, okay, let me back up just a moment. Within people who do family therapy, it was well known that people, especially young people, who had been genuinely abused or had some serious problem happen, in the course of their therapy, it was common for monster imagery to come up. That was something that therapists knew, and that you'd work through and move beyond. But now with the satanic hysteria out there, when this stuff came up, a susceptible therapist would go, "Oh, this is evidence that the person was satanically abused." And now instead of working through the monster imagery, someone mentioned Lauren Stratford, exactly, she brought us the term breeder. Someone mentioned that in the chat. To account for why we didn't have a bunch of missing kids now, because they were breeding their own kids for sacrifice. But so instead of working through the monster imagery, now they'd be teased into it. Well, this sounds like a coven. How many people were there? Well, there were 9 people there. Really? Are you sure there weren't more? Oh, well, there were 2 more. Well, that's 11. No, are you sure there weren't more? Now it's 13. Well, now I'm not going to ask for any more because now I've reached the number I want you to get to. And in the McMartin preschool case, I literally heard recordings of someone in the health, the family services group talking to someone. And I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have the exact wording, saying, did they tie you to the altar, Mikey? No, they didn't tie me to an altar. Are you sure they didn't tie you to the altar? No, I wasn't tied to an altar. Billy's already told us that he was tied to an altar. You're as smart as Billy, aren't you? Oh yeah, well, they tied me to the altar and twice as tight. It was that kind of thing that was just pulling information out of kids right and left. And as a result, in a normal child abuse case, the child would tell their story like 5 times. In a satanic child abuse case, the child would tell their story typically 30 times. Now imagine what that's doing to the kid. People being brought into court typically were not being convicted because the evidence was bullshit. It didn't go anywhere. In the McMartin preschool case, the most expensive case in California history, it ended in a mistrial the first time around. And then when they ended up just focusing on the person that they felt they had the most evidence against, a guy named Bucky, I can't remember his first name, they got a mistrial again. And it was because the satanic evidence, including things like the governor, they had been flown to the governor's mansion for satanic rituals in the middle of the day, extensive underground tunnels under the daycare center that weren't there. It was all just led nowhere, which meant people were being put through this court system and their lives destroyed. Some people were being convicted on the shallowest of evidence. The kids' lives were being destroyed. And if someone had genuinely abused them, they got away with it.
Don, I'd like to
Yep.
insert here, if you don't mind.
I will go on. So yes, please do.
I used to do training from time to time when I was asked for police groups or typically victim advocates and law enforcement victim advocates. So they had me at an annual conference ages ago. And I don't even remember what I was saying, but the whole ballroom started buzzing and I thought, oh my God, what did I do? What's wrong? And the person who had introduced me said, folks, we need to let our guests know why you're reacting to what she just said. So the person right in front of me said, if we had known what you've just shared with us in the first 5 minutes, back in the day, we could have put John Todd, aka Chris Collins, in prison at least 2 years before we were able to catch him.
Yep.
And
some people may remember John Todd from Chick Comics.
Yeah, if you just say the words McMartin daycare, police groups just shudder. I mean, a wave goes through the room. So, yeah, the money actually, I think, got the message across, plus the waste of everybody's time and the trauma that the children and families would have gone through.
Well, so we published a book called Satanism in America, How the Devil Got Much More Than His Due in 1989. And it was a report for law enforcement, but we had extra copies. And so we sold them. And they sold well enough that we did like another printing. And that sold out. And that was basically it. But then the backlash started. And because I was the occultist on the team, you're not going to go after Ken Lanning at the FBI, but Don Frew, the witch, boy, there's the easy target. Hal Lindsey, who was a well-known evangelist who did the late great Planet Earth, in an interview, he described us as agents of the Antichrist setting church against church to bring about the end times. But I was the only author he mentioned. And then Lyndon LaRouche, who had run for president several times, but was constantly getting caught for credit card fraud, in his executive intelligence report had an article, Satan's army's generals expose themselves in recruitment manual. And I always thought, expose themselves, really? But he said, normally we only catch the lower echelons, the Ozzy Osbournes. Now we know who the ringleaders are. And I thought, well, if I'm a general in Satan's army, I'm not getting paid nearly enough. And then the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in DC, Bob Larson, who was a radio evangelist, asked me to come and talk about the book. And I was going to be on the program with Mike Warnke, the author of the book, The Satan Seller, who was supposedly an ex-satanic priest. And I went to this and I had my name tag with Bob Larson's group and all these people. It was fun going around this whole convention where people say, he's going to have a devil worshiper on. I'd say, no, I think it's going to be a witch, actually. And it was really fun. And when I was on the program, Pat Pulling of Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons was in the audience, and Phyllis Schlafly was in the front row. And Oral Roberts, but his son, Richard Roberts, was in the front row. And anytime I really scored a point, like asking Mike Warnke, if he had been a leader of all these groups, why hadn't he led the police to any of the places where the meetings were? Why hadn't he turned in any of his fellow Satanists? I said, they would turn my mic down. And I had said I would not be on the program with a survivor of satanic abuse because the person has a hugely emotional story to tell and there's nothing you can do. You know, you can't say you're wrong without it coming out as you're lying. You know, so I said, I'm not going to do that. So they had the person come in by phone. You know, so it was really a scam. And then afterwards, everyone knew who I was. And so I had this cloud of spiritual pollution around me everywhere I went, where people would kind of realize they were getting close to me and veer away.
You know,
it was absolutely fascinating.
To the credit of some Christian journalists, Cornerstone Magazine did do an excellent expose. Mike Warnke of
absolutely, we worked with them on
Michelle
that.
and Leonard Padster and several other things, and that's still kind of the go-to article. Yes,
it is, especially on Mike Warnke. They all the time when he said he was a devil worshiper with long scraggly hair and nails, they found photos of him in high school in like these nice, you know, blue suit with the puffy shirt and everything. You know, this is when he was leading the satanic cult. You know, but the main thing, I want to just last thing about that is we thought this was dead. We thought it was over. Yeah. And then in 2020, I was contacted by the Satanic Temple, the group that like put up the Baphomet statue and things, saying they have a whole branch that works with the resurgence of the satanic hysteria in the mental health professions. And they want to reprint our book. And so we're now working with them. We've done the contracts and they had us on a conference, a Zoom conference. So I was really, really sad to see that it reared its ugly head again, primarily because our work was before the internet. And so it kind of disappears. And now with the internet, all the people that we thoroughly debunked, you can look up immediately in Google. So it seems like the work's gone out the window and we have to start over again. So that's all. Yeah, I'm done with that.
Thank you. That was good. I wondered, I've seen a lot of interesting comments and conversations going on the chat box, but I haven't seen a question. Mm-hmm. So why don't you just take a couple of minutes here at the end to share about your passion for Egypt and supporting efforts there, which to me is kind of like the Lost and Endangered Religion projects, because I am committed.
And then I definitely would like to get a blurb in for the Addisonton Library before.
That was on my list. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Like I said, the first book I ever read on my own was a kid's book of Egyptian myths. And so I've just had a love since then. And I've been back to Egypt several times. 1975, when I was 15. And strangely enough, right in that time period, when we were talking to an Egyptologist at Abydos, at the temple Abydos, he was sorting potsherds. And he said, yeah, that's basically what Egyptology is now. You know, all the major discoveries have been made. You know, we're doing this kind of work. And I thought, boy, that doesn't sound that interesting. And it turned me away from Egyptology. And now, of course, amazing finds have been made all over Egypt. And so just this weird chance encounter sort of turned me into a different career, which probably is why I'm here. But then I got interested in, now that I was retired and had time, I got interested in getting back to studying hieroglyphs, studying ancient Egyptian language. And so I went to Egypt in 2015 and took a class there with Bill Petty, who's you're going to take a trip with. And he was being assisted by an Egyptologist named Ted Brock, who has since passed away, I'm sorry. But he was working on tomb KV8, the tomb of Merenptah. And he was mentioning that his grant had run out just before finishing the signage for the site. And I said, well, how much do you need to finish? And he said, just about $2,000, that's all. And I said, well, I can do that. So basically here, I did it through Bill and it was sent to him. And so, they were able to do the signage for the tomb. And I didn't think much of it until I was back. I then went twice with Matt Wheelton, who some people may know as a Kemetic scholar who passed away this last May. And there's stories there about him and interfaith, which we may not have time for. but I went back in 2020, and I was at the temple at Karnak, and someone was showing us how they'd recently discovered all these bits and pieces that were laid out in a big field along with lots of other bits and pieces of what had been a shrine of Tutankhamun. And they said, what we really need to do is collect these and get them off the ground where they're exposed to groundwater. And I said, well, what does it take to do that? And they said, well, we need to build something called a mastaba, which is basically a low platform. And once again, I said, how much would that cost? And they said about $2,000. And my friend Suzanne and I just started thinking about it. And we talked about it with our guide, Mamdua. And the next day we were at the temple at Luxor, where they showed us a bunch of pieces of a Colossus of Thutmosis the fourth, which is a very unusual thing to have at the temple at Luxor. And they had a similar problem. And he said, well, we're planning to do this thing over at Karnak. And he said, 2,000 would pay for 2 mastabas easy. So, and I said, okay, what's the deal here? And basically what it turned out is, if someone gets a grant, it goes through a whole bunch of layers in Egypt, which takes up, at least a year. And at every layer, somebody takes a piece. But if I'm just somebody that's there and says, hey, I love what you're doing, have some money, you can do that. There's no problem there. And I trust my guide. I've known him now for many years. And I said, if we get the money and we give it to you and you can give it to them, we talked to the head of the site. He, Mamdua talked to Dr. Waziri, who's the head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities. And we worked it out. Unfortunately, he was coming to the site the day after we left, but we worked it out. And I immediately got flooded with photos of Dr. Waziri there approving what we were doing, of the bricks being delivered, of the concrete being poured. I mean, just like immediately all this work getting done.
Wow.
And I just recently got sent photos of the Colossus of Thutmose restored. It's now been put together and put back up. So we just started thinking,
Right.
The problem is this is not enough money to get a grant. If you tried, by the time it went through the process, at least half of it would be gone. But there are a lot of people like me and my friend Suzanne, who did this, said, it'd be really cool to be able to say, like, look at this Colossus and say, I did that, for not very much money. And if several people said, I can put $100 in, or something like that, we can put together $2,000. The next program that's in the works, I was hoping to get something back from Mamdua in time for this right away, but last year, actually, no, it was just before the pandemic. In the first courtyard at the Great Temple of Amun at Karnak, there's a giant pylon, first pylon, then there's a courtyard, and then the second pylon. And in the first pylon, there's a number of ram-headed sphinxes that form a passageway, processional. And on one side, they're behind a big mound of mud bricks that have been there for 2,500 years. Well, they decided, let's take some of these for Cairo. They pulled 4 of them out and took them to Cairo to put in a square basically around the obelisk. And in the process, so went, the last work that was done on these, it was done in the 19th century, was crap. The foundations for these things are falling apart. Everything needs to be restored here. And so there's now a process underway to remove them, build new foundations for them, put them back in place. And it's sort of happening bit by bit. So that's the next project we're raising money for.
I think Salima Ikram just reported on that.
Probably, yeah. I met her over there a couple of years ago. Yeah, she helped me pick out a scarf for my wife, Anna. She's really nice. But I have to say, this is entirely based on trust. That I trust Mamdua, Mamdua trusts what Dr. Waziri trusts Mamdua, people trust me. I hope there's no nonprofit involved. There's no tax deduction, nothing.
It's relationship.
And it's just the hope that, if this goes south, I'm only out $100 or something like that, so it's that kind of project. It's not anything that's, we're not going to form an organization for it, because then it gets into the official paperwork, and all of that. But anyway, that's been sort of a personal passion of mine to be involved. A long time ago, I said to myself, I'm never going to be Howard Carter, but maybe I could be Lord Carnarvon. And that's sort of where this is going.
Howard Carter wouldn't exist without Carnarvon. You want to take just a minute to say something about Addisonton?
Yeah. a few years ago, actually, it was in 2011. I have like a lot of people of our generation have very large libraries, of occult books. And in my house, actually, one bedroom, I'd gotten library shelving to make aisles down one of the bedrooms. And so it was just, filled with books. And even so, they were forcing my wife and I out of house and home. I thought, God, I'm gonna have to put these in storage. And then I thought, I have a bunch of friends with large libraries too. What if we put them in one place and let people use them? And what was a simple idea of sort of getting a storage room and things sort of morphed into, oh my God, we're going to have to become a nonprofit, and and the initial people who put their libraries in will be the board, and we're going to have to create this whole thing. And so the people that made that happen were me, Rowan Fairgrove, who's with us now, Gus Dizarega, Anna Korn, Diana Paxson, and Glenn Turner. And then over the years, we've had Greg Stafford and George Hirsch join us, but both of them have passed away. And so we have a board of 6, and started assembling our libraries. And we are now, I'd sort of figured, okay, I think we have about 13,000 books. I think we can fit that in this space. And of course, I hadn't planned on people giving us their collections, including Matt Wilton, who most recently just gave us 1,500 books on Egyptology that are all top class Egyptology books. But so we have to get new space, and we're in negotiation to get a space next to us so we can basically just expand into it. So we're working on it.
So if anybody wants to learn more about Addisonton, you've got a website, right?
I'm going to put it in the chat right now. I don't have to make sure I spell Addisonton right.
Don,
and I'm going to say, Addisonton came around because we were trying to find a word that wasn't preferring any one of the cultures or pagan traditions of the people involved. So it's Greek. And there's all these pagan libraries out there that like to say, oh, the Library of Alexandria, we're going to be the new Library of Alexandria. Well, Addisonton was the city of Hermes that, according to the Corpus Hermeticum, was the city at the farthest west to which all the gods would withdraw. But when the worship of nature returned, the gods would all come forth from that place. And so I thought, well, we're to the farthest west of Egypt, and San Francisco already has a pyramid. So how about Addisonton? So that's where the name came from. I put the link in the chat. And if you go there, you can also put a link and you can see all of our collection that's currently in the database. There's still a lot more to go in. So thank you for letting me put that plug in.
Don, we cannot thank you enough. And all of you votaries who sponsored today, we are so grateful for all of you and your support of Cherry Hill and our ongoing work. As I said, we'll have another program. Did I say January 22nd? With an Italian witchcraft scholar, Giovanna Parmigiani. And I hope you all will be able to join us for that. Please consider going to Cherry Hill Seminary as well and helping us meet that match by our donors so we can bring in somebody to follow in Candace's footsteps. Thank you all for being here today, and hail and welcome and goodbye.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Don, you want to stay on with me for just a minute? And thank you, Wes, for the help.
And it was recorded, correct?
Yes.
And that'll include the chat.
We're still